And welcome on the spot. My name is Patrick Amara. Now, news surrounding the arrest of former four-time presidential candidate Dr. Kizza Besigye has reawakened the debate of extradition and increasing concern for Uganda's security operation on the Kenyan soil. Besigye has been arrested more than once. However, the most shocking part in this arrest is that he was apprehended from Kenya, where, according to close sources, he had gone on the invitation of Kenya's prominent political figure, Martha Karua, for a book launch. And this perhaps throws panic among opposition political figures and raising skepticism on Kenya's sovereignty in protecting them. Sharing knowledge on the aspects surrounding Besigye's arrest and Kenya's Uganda procedures of extradition are Mr. Bayan Turinawe, a lawyer and part of Besigye's legal team, Alan Mulindwa, a lawyer, and Godbert Mushave is also a lawyer and policy analyst. Gentlemen, allow me to just call you by your first names if that's okay with you. Bayan, Godba, and Alan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
A warm welcome to all of you, and I'm going to begin with you, Bayan, because, like I said in my introduction, you are one of the on the team of the lawyers for Dr. Besigye. Perhaps you even have more information that is current on how he was apprehended in Kenya, only turned up in the military detention in Uganda. What happened? How did your client get to this?
Thank you so much, Kamara. Just like you have said, my name is Bayan Turinawe. I'm an advocate, and I'm part of the legal team representing Dr. Besigye. It's important for me to say that not only am I representing Dr. Kizza Besigye, but I'm also representing the 36 that were arrested from Kisumu, whom we have just secured bail for, which is a pre-trial remedy in the case they are battling with of terrorism. It is also important to mention that my client brings the nation greetings, and through one of our colleagues, he sent greetings to the nation and said that whereas he's in a smaller maximum prison, which is Ruzira, all of us and all the population in Uganda are in a bigger prison called Uganda by the things that are happening in the nation. It is also important for me to make mention of the fact that our Deputy Lord Mayor has lost a brother, and we pray that the soul of the brother rests in eternal peace. Back to the main subject of the matter, which is how did Dr. Besigye, and of course, whereby we are representing him jointly with Obed Kamlegea, Mr. Obed Kamlegea. For you to ask me how he ended up in Uganda is one that I cannot answer. Maybe you should have some other person to answer that. We were notified through some sources that they're just going to arraign him in a court of law, and that was Wednesday, yesterday. Of course, laughable that we are calling it a court of law because we do not believe it's a court of law, and that is why on this discussion and within this program, I'm going to extend and extensively discuss the subject of the proceedings in the military tribunal, and I will not be held by the rules of law such as res sub judice, because I don't recognize that as a court of law rather than a military tribunal, just like the Constitutional Court has stated. So for you to ask me how Dr. Besigye and Mr. Obed Kamlegea ended up in Uganda would be one I cannot answer.
Bayan, I'm asking you that because him being your client, probably he has intimated to you that this is what happened to me. But if he didn't, that's okay.
Absolutely, and I understand you, Kamara, that the question is not far-fetched. What I'm only saying is that we were given only 15 minutes of interaction to formalize instructions and understand the charges that are brought against him at the military court-martial. Those are things that cannot be happening in our country right now. For you to want to interact with your client before arraignment, because before arraignment, I understand that the procedure in the military court-martial is that you have a right to object to the offenses. Now, after that right of objection of the offenses is when you take plea. If you take plea, you cannot get a ruling if you object to the offenses, such as what they did to us. He was remanded on a clear objection by the Defense Council, and they said they are going to give us a ruling on the 2nd of December. So if we find that he was indeed not legitimately, or as our submissions were, that the charge is defective, that he shouldn't be in that specific court at the time, it means that he has spent more than a week on remand for a charge that does not exist. And for us, we argue as Defense Counsel that even a day of an innocent person in prison is something that cannot be withstood. And therefore, when we have this whole conversation, we shall understand that what the government of Uganda has done, what the security forces have done, is too illegal to even condense and comprehend by the population. And no wonder he says that we are in a bigger prison, which is called Uganda.
Let me come to you, Godba Mushabe. And for you, you come in here appropriately because you also work for the Great Lakes Institute for Security Studies?
Strategic. Yeah.
Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies.
Yeah.
Where does this leave Kenya?
Yeah.
The sovereignty of Kenya.
Yeah.
And, you know, the Uganda's partnership with Kenya. Kenya as a partner state of the East African community. Kenya that we hope is probably a more democratic nation, maybe taking steps more than Uganda. Where does that leave Kenya? Because they say they do not even know what happened.
Yeah.
Do you believe them?
No, so Patrick, this is the point. I think first of all, let me start by correcting you and correct NTV, because you're saying the Besigye arrest. Besigye was not arrested. Besigye was kidnapped in Kenya. Kidnapping is different from arrest because in law there are very clear procedures on how you arrest people and what happens to them. So when you use the idea that Besigye was arrested, you are really giving a full misrepresentation of
because
the
we have to think that Uganda is still a state. It's still a nation.
No.
Unless you want to say that the government is we still want to think that Uganda is not in the business of abducting people.
When rogue states do what they do, they have to be characterized as such. What happened in Kenya has implications for a number of for countries, whether Uganda, Kenya, but let's look at it at different levels. One, if a country, if security operatives of a country like Uganda go to Kenya and abduct someone, that's a violation of international law. The sovereignty of Kenya has been abused and undermined, and there are obligations that are imposed on states in respect of international law. So at the very basic level, and because Kenya has probably even has basically said we don't know what happened. So there are two things that have happened. One, Uganda has violated the sovereignty of Kenya. Number two, the Kenyan government has basically demonstrated that it's probably incapable of pistol in Kenya. Ugandan laws do not have extraterritorial application. There is no way you can be a Ugandan having, even if you are having guns in Kenya, and they say you have committed crimes against the state of Uganda. Those, if there are any crimes that were committed, they were committed against the state of Kenya. So the arresting authority, the prosecution would actually be in Kenya, it would not be here. And of course, thirdly, the idea that you get this kind of mercenary operation and you get Dr. Besigye here and he's in the court martial, and this is a retired army officer. He is no longer a serving officer as prescribed under the UPDF Act. I think it's very frustrating to see even lawyers, you know, those gentlemen, the prosecutors of UPDF. You know, for me, I feel like it's embarrassing both to us as Ugandans, but also embarrassing to the legal profession, for us who teach law, that you are a prosecutor, even if you are in the UPDF, and you are preparing charge sheets of this nature, presenting them before the the court-martial tribunal, and then you have these senior army officers. I think the chairman of the court-martial is a brigadier, and this kind of charge sheet is presented before you, and you basically have the courage to be able to almost operate like you are a judge, because some of us who have studied law, when you study law, you are supposed to have a certain level of pride, because that's what the law gives you. 3-4 years of law school gives you pride because you know the law. So you are not supposed to be used to do silly things, because the charge sheet that was presented for against Dr. Besigye and his colleague, it's really silly for all intents and purposes. So when a lawyer, whether you are a soldier or not, and you go and defend it, that is what we should worry about as Ugandans. And finally, the thing that the Ugandan security did in Kenya, it was done here. You remember when the Rwandan nationals were being abducted here, and these two countries almost went to war because of this situation. So you ask yourself, but Uganda, for us Ugandans who have gone through this, why then do we have a government that thinks that it is okay for you to go in the territory of another country and kidnap a person, a citizen who was exited here through immigration, entered into Kenya through immigration? So this person is really is not a fugitive, because you could go and do this because maybe this is a fugitive, he's running off from the law. But I think that there are fundamental questions that our government and the Kenyan government have not been able to answer, and I think we need to be asking those hard questions. So,
Mr. Alan Mlindwa, what do you make of this? Is this like the Kenyan security apparatus and in Uganda working in cohorts, in your view? Or can we believe that the Kenyan security apparatus is so incompetent that the Ugandan foreign agents can just get into Kenya and do whatever they want and get out? Because if this is just actually an act of transboundary repression by Uganda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kamara. Just like my predecessors have said, when we look at the extradition laws of Uganda, they mirror those of Kenya. The difference with the extradition laws of Kenya, the very slight difference, is that when you want to extradite someone from Kenya, you apply to the cabinet secretary. So yet in Uganda, when you're dealing with extradition, you deal with the judiciary entirely. So the order comes from the cabinet secretary, which is more of the executive, and then you go through the process of judiciary. Now, that in essence, the Extradition Act in Kenya gives more powers to the cabinet secretary. The judiciary, once there's no order,
that's the equivalent of Minister of Justice and Constitutional Affairs.
Yes. So that's where the difference is. So the cabinet secretary can issue an order, and then the magistrate is the one who has the powers to hear an application which you make. For example, Dr. Besigye was at liberty if he had gone through the process of either voluntarily surrendering or going through the process.
But Alan, you see now, we cannot even talk about extradition because Kenya has said they do not know. So that process is entirely non-existent in this kind of discussion.
Yeah, and also maybe to add from what my colleague has said, I think the right word here would be abduction. Because when we say kidnap, it has a connotation of ransom of sorts. So here we did not see any intention of the ransom.
Yeah, but also when
so I think I would be comfortable with the word kidnap, whether with the word abduction, because this is forceful, but we don't know the exact facts, whether it was our Ugandan security personnel who went to Kenya and drove Dr. Besigye from the apartment through the border.
But Aaron,
you have to know also there's a precedent for this. Kenya seems to be a playing field for many foreign agents. It has happened before, but a Turkish opposition leader was taken from Kenya.
Yeah.
It's two British nationals, I think, working for UNHCR, were taken from Kenya.
Yeah.
The 36 that Bayern is representing were taken from Kisumu.
Yes. Yeah.
In the 90s, I used to remember, there was, I think, opposition politician in Rwanda, I think was called Sedashonga, taken out, his life, taken out in Nairobi.
Yeah.
So probably they have been that weak.
Yeah, no. First of all, on Aaron's point, you see, in this particular case, we don't have to be very, very. We don't have to deal with these facts that it's like we are trying to establish the facts. The facts that are clear is that Dr. Besigye traveled to Kenya,
Correct.
and he ended up in Uganda, and in Uganda he's being presented by the military before the court martial. So in other words, we don't have to even be figuring out how did he come from Kenya or whatever, because if it was a formal due process, whether it is a process of extradition or a process of deportation, or that would be known. To the extent that was not the process, because those are the two processes in which you can get a foreign national repatriated to the country of origin. So to the extent that they are not, then this person was actually kidnapped. You can kidnap without having to deal with the ransom, by the way. Yeah, depending, because normally the reasons are.
But can you extradite somebody who also has a political dispute with the country?
No, you see, when the process of extradition is initiated, then you can go to the courts and defend. In other words, if Uganda wanted to extradite Besigye, and they can level these kinds of offenses, Besigye would have to prove that he's actually a political exilee, and therefore defend himself. But then he would still follow through the entire due process. But on the question that you raised, I think we have a problem with the Ruto regime now in Kenya, because these kinds of cases they have become more conspicuous and more regular. So it is possible to argue that probably these kinds of actions are taking place with the acquiescence of the Ruto regime, and that is very worrisome. Because if Ugandans cannot be safe in Kenya, it means that we are going back to the days, I think that those were the days of the late Arap Moi in the mid-1990s. That's when Ugandans were really harassed and some of them killed in Kenya. And so for both Uganda and Kenya, you are basically taking a step back, because what happened to Dr. Besigye here, and the kind of show that is going on in the court martial, including the 36 FDC leaders, these are the things that normally President Museveni talked to us about, complaining about Idi Amin. So in other words, you can expect these things to have happened during Idi Amin's time. I don't think that they should be happening now. And so we are seeing Uganda going back to the Idi Amin time, Kenya going back to the Moi time. So that's something to worry about as a region. And I think that's why I would really call every Ugandan, every Kenyan should be condemning this kind of action, because this is not where we should be as a region. This is not where we should be as countries.
So, Bayan, you as the legal representative, are you also demanding Kenya to come out and explain how this happened? And if such a crime, an alleged crime happens, how should it have been handled in Nairobi legally?
Okay, thank you so much, Kamara. Before we take leave of the question which my brother asked, which I would want to answer on who arrested these accused currently in the military court martial, I would want to answer that question without a shadow of a doubt that they were Ugandan security agents, because our clients tell us that they started by speaking Swahili. After some kilometers of travel, they changed to Luganda, and after some kilometers of travel, they started speaking to Dr. Besigye in Runyankore. Now, that is not...
These Kikuyu guys are multilingual.
It's no shock, because the only issue is that we are discussing Dr. Besigye'S arrest, Dr. Besigye and Mr. Kamulegeya's arrest in isolation with the 36, because the 36 tale was that they were also arrested by a joint operation of Kenya and Uganda, and mostly the Ugandan officers were the indisciplined ones who were beating them to sustain injuries that they did, who were speaking to them in Runyankore. They would ask you your name and speak to you in Runyankore in interrogation on arrest, and they are the ones who brought them back to Kampala without any immigration clearance, and they are currently in Kampala, locked up on bail without a status of entering back in Kampala. Now, what is interesting, and probably what I must mention, is that the difference, the only difference of the 36 and the two, which is Dr. Besigye and Dr. Obed Kamulegeya, is that among the 36, there was a refugee who had refugee status in Kenya. Now, whereas the reason we are discussing Dr. Besigye now is because of he's a political figure, and so everyone takes interest. But there is an individual who is in Uganda on bail, yet he's a refugee in Kenya holding refugee status. And yet he cannot go back, but he's around, hanging around. So I think it speaks to a magnitude of human rights violation that is happening in the country by the state operatives. And now, coming back to your question, which I would want you to remind me on, your question.
Yes, I wanted to know whether, you know, these guys were working in cahoots with the
Kenyan security,
with the Kenyan security, and what should have actually have happened legally if he committed a crime in Kenya. How should they have handled it?
The response we had from that in the military tribunal, which we appeared before, of course, under opposition, is that they are using Section 208 of the UPDF Act to do the actions they did, to enter Kenya and arrest a person, which section says that a person who commits a service offense under the Act can be arrested, whether in Uganda or outside Uganda, can be arrested. And our contention, of course, was that this section talks about a service offense. Yeah. It does not talk about offenses committed by civilians. Yeah. Now, in the Mike Kabaziguruka versus Attorney General case, Justice Kakuru, J as he then was, rest in peace, had an able discussion on what a service offense is. A service offense is one that is of disciplinary nature by an army officer, a serving army officer. Now, even if you wanted to stretch it and say Dr. Kano Besigye is a retired officer, therefore he has been in the army, what about his co-accused? Because his co-accused in court stated to the military tribunal that he has never even been a scout. He has never served any military or likelihood of military organization in his entire life. So a service offense cannot be overstretched to charge our clients of that.
I can imagine that they will run that they were having government stores, in this case UPDF.
Whereas
for having ammunition and arms.
Whereas that can be argued, it's not a statement of fact, of course, that we know confidently from our clients, and of course from the past abuse of that specific charge of possession of arms, that we know that it's not a statement of fact. But even if it was, just like my brother has already stated, that this is possession in Kenyan land. And just like we contended in the military tribunal, that you cannot say that the military of Uganda or the state of Uganda has jurisdiction over all charges that are committed on this earth. That if a charge was committed in Geneva, if a charge was committed in Athens, if a charge was committed in Nairobi, you have jurisdiction over that specific charge. So having ammunition would mean that they have ammunition in Kenya, and therefore they violate the law of Kenya, not the law of Uganda. But the military wants us to believe that Dr. Besigye and Obed Kamulegeya had 2 guns to attack Uganda. 2 pistols,
two pistols to
with
attack
8
Uganda.
rounds of ammunition to attack the whole army of Uganda. That is not believable. I think they can do better.
Alan, if they had illegal, if they are possessing arms and ammunition in Kenya, then they should be somewhere in a community prison, not Luzira.
Yeah, I think I agree to that point. But there's another offense. This is the one relating to security under Section 128 of the APDF Act, where they are saying that, I think that's what is being at large. They are saying that when
Others stay at large?
Yeah, no, they were at large in these cities, in Geneva, in Switzerland, Athens, in Nairobi, held meetings aimed at soliciting for logistical support. So when we talk about logistical support, I think that is a little bit a technical word. Maybe the security people know better. But that would mean that somebody is trying to get arms. Is he trying to get arms which can be used to overturn a government or fight a government? Is that what they're relating to? That is also something to explore. But there is a small point that before good bad come in, that one thing we must agree as lawyers, that the rule of law must be upheld in every state. That we cannot compromise, whether it's in the court martial, whether it's in the courts of law, whether it's in Kenya or Uganda or the cabinet, wherever it is. So Dr. Besigye, if the law of extradition in Kenya is very clear that someone cannot be extradited or surrendered before the lapse of 15 days. Someone is arrested on Saturday and the journey begins on Sunday, if I'm right. So that is already a violation of the Extradition Act in Kenya. So we are wondering if Dr. Besigye has lawyers in Kenya to really take on the state in Kenya, because this is something that would look at as a violation of the rights of Dr. Besigye. We have also seen the Uganda Human Rights Commission coming up and also condemning this charge sheet, saying that this charge sheet is defective. Of course, the opinion is with the court, and my land senior brother here, who happens to have been my teacher also in international law.
All these are his students, by the way. Kudos to you.
I hope I'm doing him great. I'm not embarrassing him.
And including the people who have grown.
Yes, so
Probably.
we must agree to a point that where there's violation of the law, we know that if this case went to a civil court, it will not see the light of day. Because now we have the Human Rights Enforcement Act in Uganda. We also have the Human Enforcement Rules, which are very clear that where there is a violation of any right of the accused person or the suspect, the court will stop the hearing and then will hear the violation. So if the state, because the state is equal in law, that's why that act came into place. So if this came to our civil courts, we believe that the cases against Besigye will be dismissed.
Gentlemen, we're going to take a break on the spot. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching On the Spot. My name is Patrick Amara, and my guests this evening, all of them are lawyers. I have Bayan Tunawi, Godba Tumushabe, and Mr. Alan Mulindwa. And we're discussing, is it the arrest or the kidnap, or is it the abduction? Well, the semantics there, no, but this, it is abduction?
This is an abduction. They are not semantics.
The thing is here is that I have 3 lawyers here. Yeah. I think before, after the end of this show, I will also become a lawyer. But Bayan, this is happening during the rule of law week. Can you imagine what the opposite direction Uganda is taking? In your view, we in Uganda, are we really living under the rule of law as it should be?
Thank you so much, Patrick. I am only shocked that you who has been in journalism for this long can ask me whether.
You know why? Because up to today, Brian,
Yes.
you are going to court, you're representing clients, you're winning cases, and probably you're even being paid for it. And for you, so and you're doing your trade, you're doing your craft.
Absolutely, but maybe to answer the question, we have not had the rule of law in Uganda for long. And if I may, in a democracy or a sane democracy, when you want to examine the question of rule of law, you start with the issue of separation of powers. That is there separation of powers within our organs of government, including the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. If you dispense with the issue of separation of powers, now you go into the issue of checks and balances. Are there checks and balances? Do they check themselves better? And we have seen circumstances where court issues an order in Uganda and parliament trashes it away, or a minister comes and trashes it away, or vice versa. So there has been contemptuous situations.
Sometimes someone as small as an RDC.
Absolutely.
Yes.
We have seen RDCs issue orders vis-a-vis court orders. You have a high court decision and the person comes and, because he's an RDC, overthrows it. So we have a situation whereby those arms of government are contemptuously abusing the principle of checks and balances. And if you do not have checks and balances, separation of powers, then you cannot have rule of law in a country. And maybe to state the rationale of Mike Baziguruka, or in relation to this discussion, the rationale of Mike Baziguruka, and I will again quote Justice Kakuru, as he was then, of the court of the Constitutional Court. He was of a view and an opinion that the reason why we cannot charge a civilian in the military court-martial is because if you put a civilian in the military court-martial, which is controlled and under the authority of the chief in command, who is the president and who is part of the executive, it means you do not have a judiciary dispensing justice, because the military court-martial is under direct control of an individual. Because if you examine under our constitution, under Article 126, where it states that judicial power is derived from the people and exercised on behalf of the people by their values and their beliefs. And then you examine Article 28 and 29, whereby they now establish judicial organs to dispense justice. The military court-martial is not among them, because they establish the Supreme Court, the Court of Appeal, and the High Court. Now, the military court-martial is later established by a UPDF Act, whereby it was in operative of the section that creates the UPDF, in good spirit, of course, but only to administrate against discipline of military officers, not civilians, not any other person, as Justice Kakulu states. But we have a problem, Kamara, which I can probably state before you bring in another person, that in the decision of Mike Baziguruka, having received the positive jurisprudence, the Attorney General of Uganda, the Attorney General of Uganda, and I will not make any further comment on his person, decided to appeal the decision in the Supreme Court. Now, we do not have a problem because an appeal is a creature of statute and it's a right of a litigant. But we have a problem with the stay of execution, because if you stay execution of a decision that is fundamentally affecting human rights and liberties, then it means you are saying that the balance of convenience lies with the other party trying to stay.
Okay.
The balance of convenience of civil liberties cannot lie with the Attorney General in that case.
Following your point there. And thank you for not commenting more on the Attorney General.
Why?
Somebody has already done that.
Why?
Your president has already commented. So,
I really don't understand. No, because it's wrong.
This
First
is what
of
I
all,
want to
Let me
ask.
tell you, because Ugandans, I think we are just being unfair to ourselves. Brian has raised very good comments. Separation of powers, checks and balances. There is a third component, a third element to what rule of law is. Rule of law means that everybody is subject to the law. Everybody is subject to the Constitution. In other words, there is no other power above the Constitution. Whether it is the president, whether it is a military officer, everybody is subject to the law and to the Constitution. So that's what makes rule of law. So right now, you have the guys who abducted Besigye from Nairobi and their commanders who issued the orders. They are acting against the law in contravention of the law.
It's the executive who is trying also to do judicial service.
Absolutely,
which is wrong.
The military court-martial is a quasi-judicial body. Quasi-judicial means that this is an administrative tribunal, but it is some rules are imposed on it to try to dispense justice in a way that it mirrors what the judiciary does. So that's why the tribunal then is able to call evidence and call witnesses, but it does not become a court of judicature.
Okay,
Yeah.
but Alan, I don't know what you make of this, because we have seen this happen from way back. You remember the time when again Dr. Besigye was arrested and he was being released. Then they remember when some military men stormed the court, we call them black mambas then, you know, and I think Justice Ogola called it the rape of the temple of justice, the citadel of justice was, and many things have been happening where a court issues an order, somebody is released, and some other group of people are waiting outside in the car only to grab them and take them again. So, I mean, this is the situation we've been in. Maybe we shouldn't even get shocked. This is Uganda, isn't it?
Maybe from what my colleagues were saying about the question you asked, is there a rule of law in Uganda? I would say that when they say that there's no rule of law in this country, what is the determination they are using to say that there's no rule of law? Because we know we have the courts of law, we have a parliament which is a work in progress, we also have the executive. The difference is that the people who are put in these offices are the ones who are creating a scenario that we are in as a country. And secondly, if I look at now the American democracy, we're looking at Trump. He owns the House of Representatives, the Senate.
He owns it?
No, he has majority. I beg your pardon. He has majority. Okay, synonymously, he owns it. So he has the representative.
I think and the judiciary from Uganda.
And the judiciary itself. The Republicans are the ones who are having majority.
They have just denied his
He's
choice
one of the appointees. So that's
the Attorney General.
Yeah,
no, he has turned down the nomination.
You know, he has there's another act of law, 2008 or something, which can still enable him to appoint him. So the point is that whereas we in Africa, we should agree that our rule of law is in progress. We have so many challenges, and as Councillor Goodbar and my colleague has rightly stated, we've seen challenges of people who are being released at the court premises and they are rearrested when they have bail. So we need to work out that the people who were put in these offices uphold the rule of law.
You know, all of us are supposed to be, but Goodbar, that rule of law, let us not look at it from the prism, let's say, of those who have the mandate to lead. Everyday Ugandans, the way how we conduct ourselves, even ourselves, the way how we drive on our roads, how we totally disregard.
Patrick,
the corruption is itself.
No, look here, Patrick. Patrick, first of all, this whole question of challenge, Aaron, Uganda has shifted from looking at problems and then everything is characterized as a challenge. And I normally say the difference between a challenge and a problem is that a challenge you can live with it. A problem you have to solve it. What we have in the respect of rule of law right now is a problem. When we say there is no rule of law, we're basically saying there is no separation of powers right now. That there is almost total fusion between the three arms of the state. There is a fusion between the parliament and the executive. There is the court-martial itself is an example of a fusion. That one, I think that's what the Kabazguruka court ruling of the Constitutional Court says. By the way, the other thing that you should see, that I think that the Chief Justice, Owinyodoro, is an enabler. If there is anybody who has really undermined the rule of law, it's the Chief Justice, because there is no way you can have a case which has been determined by the Constitutional Court that is supposed to give relief to Ugandans who are being mistreated and manhandled in the court martial, and you sit on it as a Chief Justice, and you know the provisions of the Constitution, the protection that the judiciary is supposed to provide. So right now you can comfortably argue that the Chief Justice Owinyo-Doro is an enabler of the kind of harassment that citizens are getting in the court martial. So when we say there is no rule of law, we're basically saying we've seen the erosion, because the courts were never like this. The Parliament of Uganda was never the way it is now. Everybody who has talked about Parliament of Uganda will tell you there's almost consensus that the quality of the 6th Parliament was better than the one of the 7th, better than the one of the 8th, up to the point where we are.
But you present Uganda like it is really pariah, rogue, totalitarian.
In fact, I wanted to
worse than Venezuela and Afghanistan and North Korea combined.
Patrick, haven't we had elections since 1995? Haven't we had elections? And since 2001, elections have been violent. The violence has been escalating up to a point when we had to kill each other. That over 100 Ugandans are killed for us to elect a president. So when you tell me that I'm presenting Uganda as a party, I don't even understand what you mean. That you have people who have been kidnapped in Kenya and brought here and taken. These are civilians. These 36 FDC leaders. These are civilians. And whoever is sitting in that court martial knows that. The Attorney General, the one you are saying they should not talk about, he knows it.
I hope you understood what I mean when I talk about.
Yeah, so he knows. These are civilians.
And then we President Semakade has used quite some language to talk about them, and that's enough.
Then we sit back here.
Patrick, I think I was...
Patrick, we sit back here and say, oh, we are discussing Uganda as a party. These are facts, and they are Ugandans, men and women who are affected every single day because of these facts.
But for you to state, in addition to what Godba was saying, for you to state that Uganda is not worse than Venezuela or those countries. Because I think
I didn't put it that way. I don't want you to put words in my mouth. By the way, I can equally could defend myself on this legal altar. But
I think for anyone to downplay or make trivia of what is happening in Uganda is because they are not the one in prison right now, or they have not worked with people in prison to get out. And the harassment, even when you're receiving legal representation that comes from that specific side of the state. And that is why, for example, in this case of Kenya, we should watch it with a lens that you can be in the same situation tomorrow.
Yeah.
Anyone can be in the same situation. And what we call the excessive power of the state is one that is guarded against by both the law and neighboring states. It's why
the right word, Brian, is impunity. This is not excessive power.
Absolutely.
This is impunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because we understand, and just that the president or the security forces keep wanting to show us that they are the ones with the power and they hold it, which we understand. But for you to keep using authoritative or tyranny against citizens is one we shall not understand, and it's one we shall not accept.
The other thing, perhaps maybe they forget, that for those who disregard the law, it can also catch up with them at one point, and they find themselves...
Absolutely, because one of the safeguards upon that tyranny and power of the state are neighboring countries, that you can't go in a neighboring country, stay there and probably get even refugee status, and you're protected. But if that is being contempted, that East Africa now is becoming an unsecure place for anyone to be, you will not be haunted only in your country, but in 7 states across your country. Yeah. We have seen South Sudan enter Kenya and abduct citizens of South Sudan and went back, killed actually one in that incident. We have seen Ethiopia, which are not part of East Africa, but if all East African countries are going to be unsafe for political people that are being persecuted, then we have to fear.
Godba, is that a pure case of trans-boundary reparation?
No, I wouldn't call it transboundary repression. I would basically say this is state by state. The state of Uganda can decide to respect its citizens and protect them and defend them. That's what you would expect a state that is governed according to the rule of law. So even if you, Patrick, were in Kenya as a refugee, the state of Uganda should have an interest on how you are being treated, because you are being a refugee in Kenya does not, or any other country, does not make you cease to be a citizen. So the idea that we can treat political dissent with this level of brutality and authoritarianism is basically what we need to be questioning. Because what is Besigye'S crime? Besigye'S crime is that because he's an opposition politician, he disagrees with Museveni. If there are legitimate concerns by the state of Uganda, and Besigye has planned things in Geneva or South Africa or wherever, and the state has legitimate concerns and has the facts, there are processes that you follow to get him to answer. You can't be a state and operate as if you are a militia or a mercenary. That's not how states operate. Now, incidentally, many people, Aaron, they make false equivalencies between Uganda and the United States. I've seen many people say, hey, Uganda, even the United States, they do this. As you said, the Trump, who is also actually, who has authoritarian tendencies, by the way, he nominates a guy whom he wants to be Attorney General, and guys say, no, this guy has been running around with young girls, so he is not qualified. Why are they saying that? Because they're saying an Attorney General in the United States must have a certain level of credibility. The profile must be solid, and because the Attorney General in the US protects even citizens against the state. So that false equivalence between Uganda and the United States is, these are not comparable.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Alan, how how should the people like Bayern, what should they be doing in protecting the rights of Besigye? Should they open a case against the Kenyan government? Shouldn't we be seeing now lawyers, in Kenya, opening up a case against the Kenyan government?
Yeah, I want to answer that, but I wanted to briefly comment on what Doctor has said, that even we, the right-thinking members of Uganda Law Society, Mr. Semakade had cases in the disciplinary committee. They elected him. Now, if we fall short, we as lawyers, and we're condemning Semakade Isaac, the president of Uganda Law Society sits on the disciplinary committee, but he has a case, and then you elect him. Okay, just even the suspicion, why would you elect such a person? So, when I say it's work in progress,
you can't convict before that.
So now you can hear how easy you can see. So if you say that we don't have a rule of law, we do. You understand? But we are falling short because now Bayern is coming up in arms, saying that there is no conviction. So
yes,
if we are going,
somebody is innocent until proven guilty, exactly. As simple as that. So you cannot say because they're suspecting
exactly,
and then you are guilty.
Exactly.
And I think that's what he's contesting.
Exactly. So we are saying that what I'm trying to say in brief, that however much sometimes some of these charges they are trumped up. Okay, that is how we look at them from the perspective of a lawyer who's representing the client on the other side. But the ability that there is a court and then there is a ruling, there is an appellate process to that effect. I think Doctor will agree with me. But
the court
Aaron,
is not
do you agree?
Yes.
Do you agree that the Supreme Court of Uganda should have handled the Kawazguruka case the way it has handled it?
Yes,
you are okay with it?
As an advocate, I really say that the court has been complacent in not delivering that judgment on time, because this is something in national interest. So I will agree to that effect, and also agree to the fact that as also a lawyer who represents people who have been incarcerated on political related cases. When it comes to the opposition in Uganda, the space is very narrow. That we agree. But then we should not use it as a general platform that this is how the whole country looks like. I think, Council, we agree that many times when you have a challenge, even on your side, you go to courts of law.
At least
a land matter.
For me, I try as much as possible to avoid Ugandan courts
Yes.
because of my perception of them. As a citizen,
So you should be joining. You should be joining your president in banging tables because he has a right.
I'm a supporter of Semakade because I believe, in fact, if anything, I believe that we, the lawyers in this country, we are part of the problem, because there is no way the law that we teach, the law that we study at law school, the law that we teach, we cannot be the ones. And sometimes when these guys go to court, because even now you can see even Bayern, the arguments they were putting before the General Court Martial, you could, when you follow it, you feel like these guys are like they look like they are arguing logic. They are trying to present logic. That General Court Martial, there is no logic. The guy was abducted from Kenya, brought to the court martial.
How do you deal with it?
To be put in jail? No, because you are dealing with
I think I didn't answer your question.
Let me conclude this one. One thing I want Ugandans to appreciate, that for Besigye and the 36 and others, you are dealing with a political problem. The problem with lawyers is that they want to use the law to solve everything. But this is a political problem. There is no legal case against Besigye. That's why the charges.
So Bayern should not even represent him?
Yeah, that's why the charges. That's
so
why
Bayern should just forget about the guy?
It should be solved politically.
That's why the charges are written that way, because there is no case. So in other words, even when you are a lawyer and you go to the General Court Martial, and if you lose the fact that you are dealing with a political problem, then you will go and argue the law as if you are doing something very significant, and of course then your client will be still in jail. Even when he comes on December 2nd, he will still be in jail, because this is a political case. That's why we call it political persecution. Okay. But in law, we are going to try and frame it as prosecution.
Alan, I had wanted you to maybe explain on whether the legal team should actually be in Nairobi taking on the government
yes,
in Kenya.
I believe from the legal point of view, Besigye's legal team should contact lawyers in Nairobi, because this is a very big case against the government of Kenya. Very big case. Because one, somebody surrendered. In fact, there was no surrender. Somebody is abducted. So the law only allows a surrender after going through the due process. So there was no due process that Besigye went through, so he can sue the government of Kenya for violating his rights.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen.
And I think that's
yes, very quickly before we take a break.
Maybe to advance his point further, is that someone who went to law school sat within his office and drafted the charge sheet and said that Dr. Besigye and Dr. Obeid had a gun, one gun, they were holding it together with 8 ammunitions, and that is why they are charged.
And that threatened the sovereignty of Uganda and the stability of Uganda.
You see, Kamara.
That is the word of the century. Gentlemen, we're going to take a break, and on the spot, we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching On the Spot. My name is Patrick Amara, and my guests this evening, all of them are lawyers. Bayern, Godber, and Alan. Let me begin with you, and I want this time, Godber, to put on your political analyst kind of lenses. And just to find, because we're going into the political election period now, and this is happening. Could it be that somebody wants to send a message to all other actors in the opposition that, look, we see you, you are on notice?
No, so let me put it this way, because I've watched the space for a long time, participated in the political process in many different ways. managed discussion groups to look at the Ugandan political process. In 2021, a colleague of mine and I, published a paper called The Uganda Transition Scenarios 2026 and Beyond. And we basically framed what is likely to happen going forward. And you can see most of the things we predicted actually happening. Among the scenarios, we basically argued that the worst case scenario for Uganda, which is the most likely scenario, is what we described as the warrior mad king scenario. Warrior mad king scenario means that if you have a long-serving president like President Museveni, when his power is challenged, he basically runs mad. He can do the kinds of things that you don't expect any sober person to do. So if you look at the trends now since 2021, because 2021 we had the killings on the streets of Kampala. This is where you have the security forces shooting people like insects. In 2022, I think that's 2022, we had the abductions. You remember the abductions of these by these drones, where you wake up, the media people, you tell so-and-so has been kidnapped or abducted. After 1 week, the story disappears. Those ones have been there. In most recently, when the Gen Z in Kenya went protesting, the following day, after the start of the protest, the military was deployed on the streets of Kampala. If you followed, if you are a keen observer, that deployment has not ended. So, for me, my analysis is that
there's a gentleman called John Bosco Kibalama who has totally disappeared. And was first taken by government.
There's the lady that there's a lady who has been in the court also, whom they have refused to release.
Olivia?
Olivia. Not tried. They can't release her. Man, Aaron, when you say rule of law, these are real hard facts. So the arrest of Dr. Besigye can do several things. One, can send a signal that we are going to actually become more repressive. In other words, the mere fact that you have a government, it is supposed to be a legitimate government, and it can just go into another country, abduct its own citizen who has just moved on a legitimate travel, and I don't think that there were any indication that he's not coming back, but you feel a sense of urgency? No. You are doing it because you want to demonstrate that we can be this aggressive. The second thing is that this Besigye case can actually be also a false flag operation. False flag operation is that you do an operation, but actually you are aiming at a broader objective. So in other words, we can arrest Besigye and frame that he's engaged in some subversive activities, and because we need to arrest more people around that are connected to Besigye. This thing of the guns, I think it's too embarrassing. You know, some of us...
we saw this in Arua, remember, when they put in charges?
Some of us, some of us have worked, like President Museveni, we've worked with him, we like him. Many of us want him to succeed. I don't want Museveni to, all of a sudden, also when he's gone, we start talking about him the way he talks about Idi Amin. We want him to succeed. Some of us are like the UPDF. UPDF as an institution makes us proud because of their accomplishments in the region and what they have been able to do. So when you have officers come and say, the way they did in Arua, oh, we have arrested Chagulanyi, he had guns in his hotel, they bring them, they organize a press conference, show us the guns, and then they steal the guns. They disappear. Then now you are saying the military, the UPDF as the mighty army that we know of and they are talking about. You are basically saying you are scared of some two guys with one pistol and 8 rounds of ammunition of a pistol. There is a certain level of embarrassment that you feel as a Ugandan. Because you see, as a Ugandan, I want to be proud of these institutions. So when these institutions operate within the limits of the rule of law, they are professional, they honor citizens. We all benefit. We all feel happy.
And if anything, if they had that pistol and those bullets, that should have been a Kenyan problem.
That's the Kenyan. It has nothing to do with us. If there was any offences that were going to be committed, they are going to be the one. We must be looking at the offences that are against our laws, and they are not those offences they are talking about. So really, the point that I want to conclude with is to say, as Ugandans, no, the UPDF actually has a challenge, because the other thing that the Ugandans should note is that the first time Besigye was arrested, it was in 2001. If you look at the pictures, I posted some of them on my Twitter handle. That was the police. The prisons were in charge. Coming to court, the Uganda Prison Service were the one bringing a prisoner for trial. 20 years later, almost 24 years later, you have the military police. I think now it's called Directorate of
Security.
DIS. I think now they have changed it. So you are seeing this red top. They are the ones now bringing a prisoner from Makindi military barracks. So, and Aaron, to your point, when you don't see this as part of the erosion of the rule of law, then you are missing the trends. You are missing the trajectory of what we are going into. I always tell my audience is that when we challenge what the regime is doing here, it is not to say that Museveni has not done important things, because I think in terms of the scorecard, we can really talk about the incredible things he has done, both at the national level and at the regional level. The reason many of us talk about the excesses is because we are seeing a reversal. We are seeing a degeneration, and that should worry everybody, whether you are a Museveni supporter, whether you are not. As long as you are a Ugandan, these kinds of trends need to worry you, and we have to work collectively to make sure that they reverse and we go back to a positive trajectory. If
you have not been worried, just wait for the Twitter storm that's going to happen this weekend, Friday night, and you know what I mean.
Friday night?
Yeah, there's always a tweet storm that comes. And it is in love with Kenya. So you ain't seen yet. You ain't seen yet.
Actually, no, just quickly, some Kenyans said when they said these guys were having ammunition and a pistol in Nairobi, and then the Ugandan security picked this guy and brought him. The guy said, now I understand why Moses said he can capture Nairobi in 5 hours. Yes.
I didn't know you're going that way. So now, okay, gentlemen, we're going to have a concluding remarks. Let me ask you, Alan, to do your parting shot on the show tonight.
Yeah, so I want to say in conclusion that the act of the people who went and arrested Dr. Besigye in Nairobi, Kenya. I want to establish the facts, whether it was our security personnel or the working in conjunction with the Kenyan security personnel. That was a violation of the rights of Dr. Besigye, and that I condemn strongly. And also the Kenyan government must come clean, and I urge the lawyers of Dr. Besigye to really pursue. Because if we sit here and talk, we shall not get any solution. With a good brain, like the one of my former lecturer that he has, I am very interested to see him in courts of law, though he doesn't want to come to Ugandan courts of law, that the area of practice where he sees violations, like the ones that he's seeing today, let him put the people to book to account. So let there be some kind of record. Because when we condemn without action, we shall always remain unhappy.
Brian, what's going to be your parting shot?
Okay, thank you, Kamara, and the fellow panelists who weighed in on the topic of the arbitrary kidnap of Dr. Kizza Besigye and Mr. Obed Kamlekia. Of course, I've had several remarks about what we are going to do. Just like we did in the kidnap of the 36, we instituted proceedings in Kenya, in the East African Court of Justice, and of course also in Uganda. We shall take similar action against the government of Kenya and the government of Uganda, and we hold them to account and bring them to book on the misgivings they have committed against and of course infringing on the right of our clients. But importantly, we shall examine and see how best he can regain his liberty with immediate effect, whereas we think it's not one that should be done or can be done in the military courts, because that is not a court, it's a tribunal. We shall seek other avenues to see that he's released with immediate effect. And we do not see in any way us as the legal team of Dr. Besigye respecting the fact that that is a military court. Our clients have formally objected to the charges brought against them with, of course, strong opposition that they are not serving military officers. We shall continue that line because they are the instructions we have, and we shall strongly object to the trial in guidance of the decisions of the very many various decisions that have come out in courts of law, that is not a court that a civilian should be tried in. And we only pray and, of course, encourage all Ugandans to get within this, because tomorrow it can't be you. If they can't do it to the person of Dr. Besigye, knowing that the public outcry that can happen is as such that has happened, what about a Kamara? What about an Alan? What about a Godba? It's possible that anyone can face such abuse, and probably when you do face it, the public will not even know.
And let the teacher talk last.
Yeah, no. First of all, I think I would want to agree with colleagues here that the Kenyan government owes us an explanation as a people. It owes us, maybe it may not even explain to the government, because at that level they have communication. But I think the Kenyan government owes Ugandans an explanation as to how something like this can happen, or a very clear indication that they were not part of this mercenary operation that happened. Secondly, I think I would add to what Bayan said, basically, what has happened to Besigye, to Obed, to the 36 FDC leaders, and many other people who are in jail, can happen to any one of us at any one time. And as I said earlier, it does, in most cases, when there is breakdown in rule of law, it doesn't matter. Anybody is a potential victim, and you don't have to have done any wrong. Finally, I want to call upon the Attorney General, my brother Chwan Kachiliowa. I want to call upon the Chief Justice Owinyi Doro, that they have allowed the court-martial to be instrumentalized against Ugandan civilians, against Ugandan citizens. I think the two of them have the capacity and are in a position to engage both the president and the parliament to be able to say this needs to stop. Their silence is so deafening. Their silence on the way the General Court Martial has been instrumentalized against civilians, against Ugandan citizens, is so deafening, and I think is a very, very serious indictment on their competencies as officers in those institutions. Mr.
Godba Tomushabe, thank you so much. Mr. Alan Mulindwa, thank you. Mr. Bayan Turnawe, I want to thank you, gentlemen, for the time you've given us, for your submission, your contribution on this very issue. In my view, you have been phenomenal. Thank you so much. But more importantly, you, the viewer, I want to thank you for the privilege of your company. I know Dr. Besigye has been there before, and we ask to be an expeditious trial that is fair, that is just. Like he always fight, probably he's going to fight for his freedom once more. Good night, and God bless Uganda.